Right now, 4 astronauts are either strapped into a capsule on a Florida launch pad or already arcing around the moon for the first time in over 50 years. Artemis II is the moment we have been watching NASA build toward for more than a decade. But while the world is focused on that rocket, something else is happening behind the scenes. A decision made just days before launch has quietly rewritten the entire long-term plan. And the person who made that call is unlike anyone who has ever run this agency. Let's go back to how Artemis was supposed to work. The plan had 3 clear steps. First, send an uncrewed capsule around the moon to test the systems. That was Artemis I, back in 2022. Second, send astronauts on a crewed lunar flyby to verify everything works with people on board. That's Artemis II, happening right now. Third, land humans on the surface. That's Artemis III, currently targeting 2027. Supporting all of it was a piece of infrastructure called the Lunar Gateway. Think of it as a small space station parked in orbit around the moon, designed to serve as a staging hub for crews before they descend to the surface. It would also function as a science laboratory, a communications relay, and eventually a stepping stone toward Mars. Gateway was not presented as optional, and the entire crewed landing architecture was built around it as a central dependency. International partners locked in early. The European Space Agency, the Canadian Space Agency, and JAXA in Japan all committed hardware. ESA's Halo habitation module was physically delivered to NASA in April 2025. Northrop Grumman had it largely built. Contracts were signed, years of engineering work were invested, and by any reasonable measure, Gateway was real. And then, 8 days before Artemis II launched, NASA's new administrator walked into a room at agency headquarters in Washington and canceled it. The person who made that call is Jared Isaacman, and we need to understand who he is to understand why this decision happened now. He was confirmed as NASA Administrator in December 2025, and from day one, he represented something the agency had never quite had at the top: someone who had actually flown to space outside of government. Isaacman is a billionaire entrepreneur who founded Shift 4 Payments and privately funded 2 SpaceX missions, including Polaris Dawn in 2024, where his crew performed the first commercial spacewalk. He is a trained fighter jet pilot who still flies. He did not come up through the NASA career ladder, and that difference in background is load-bearing to everything we are about to discuss. The decisions he is making carry a very specific philosophy. He does not think in terms of orbital infrastructure first, surface operations later. He thinks in terms of what gets boots on the ground the fastest, and what is standing in the way of that. When we look at Gateway through that lens, the picture shifts considerably. Gateway sat upstream of the moon landing as a mandatory dependency, and Isaacman concluded the sequence was wrong. We know what traditional large-scale government programs look like. They are engineered for precision, but they are also engineered for caution. Multi-decade timelines, layered approvals, and architectures built on the assumption that every dependency must be satisfied before the next phase begins. That approach has produced extraordinary science. It has also produced $100 billion worth of deep space hardware over 20 years, with, in Isaacman's own words, limited results on the actual surface. Isaacman comes from a world where that model is disqualifying. In commercial aviation, in private spaceflight, in payments infrastructure, the cost of being slow is the cost of losing. Speed is not recklessness, it is how you stay relevant, and that is the lens he is applying to an agency that has not traditionally operated that way. We can see that philosophy runs directly through the Gateway cancellation. On March 24, 2026, at an event NASA called Ignition, Isaacman laid out his reasoning in front of roughly 160 officials from industry, Congress, and international partner agencies.
We have a bipartisan mix of members of Congress and staff from authorization and appropriation committees who have provided the direction and the resources. We have 35 international partner nations here, including ambassadors, ministers, and leaders of several space agencies who have worked alongside the United States in space for decades and will continue to do so on the journey ahead. And we have leaders from the most capable space industry in the world. NASA never undertakes these grand endeavors alone. The presence of all of you here today sends a very powerful message about what we intend to accomplish together.
Gateway, he said, is not required to accomplish our primary objectives. The orbital station, while valuable in theory, sat in the middle of the mission-critical path as a dependency that added complexity, cost, and time. Removing it makes the path to the surface direct. He was also explicit about why the urgency is real. China has its own crewed lunar program targeting a landing before 2030, and we are in a direct competition with that timeline. Isaacman framed it plainly. The clock is running in this great power competition, and success or failure will be measured in months, not years. That is an unusual sentence coming from the head of a government space agency. It signals that the old tolerance for schedule slippage is gone. What replaced Gateway is a three-phase plan called Ignition, budgeted at $20 billion over 7 years to build a permanent lunar base near the Moon's south pole. Phase 1 runs through 2028 and focuses on robotic groundwork, expanding the commercial Lunar Payload Services program to 21 lander missions. Phase 2, from 2029 through 2031, begins actual construction of surface infrastructure, pressurized rovers, power systems, communications, and 2 crewed missions per year. Phase 3, beginning in 2032, moves toward long-duration human presence with routine cargo delivery to and from the surface. This is a faster, more direct plan. It is also a plan with far higher execution risk. But the bet being placed here is that a focused surface-first strategy beats a complex orbital-first one, especially with a geopolitical clock running. All of that was announced 8 days before Artemis II left the launch pad, and we should sit with that timing for a moment. Artemis II is carrying Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, mission specialist Christina Koch, and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen on a 10-day free return trajectory around the Moon. The mission will take them approximately 4,700 miles beyond the lunar surface, further from Earth than any human has traveled since Apollo 13 in 1970. Glover becomes the first person of color, Koch the first woman, and Hansen the first non-American to travel to the Moon's vicinity. The road here was not smooth. A hydrogen leak forced a delay out of February. A helium flow issue triggered a full rollback to the vehicle assembly building in late February, pushing the launch to April. When the countdown finally began on March 30th, the weather forecast showed an 80% chance of favorable conditions for an April 1st liftoff. We are watching, right now, what may turn out to be the smoothest part of this entire program. The hard decisions have already been made, and the international partners who spent years building hardware for a station that no longer exists are only beginning to process what comes next. Because the cancellation of Gateway did not land cleanly. For some of the agencies and companies that built hardware for it, the announcement during the ignition event was the first they had heard of it, a genuinely difficult position to be put in. Let's be clear about what was actually canceled, because the scale of it matters. Gateway was not a vague future concept. The Halo module built by Northrop Grumman had already been delivered. ESA's Thales Alenia Space had completed the primary structure. JAXA had been developing the crew habitation module. The Canadian Space Agency was deep into building Canadarm3, the next generation of its famous robotic arm. Airbus, which supplies the European service module that powers Orion itself, learned about the Gateway pause during the ignition presentation, according to a company spokesperson. We are talking about years of completed work. Suddenly, without a destination, Isaacman addressed this directly. He said hardware already developed for Gateway would be repurposed rather than scrapped. The power and propulsion element will be redirected to a nuclear-powered Mars spacecraft called Space Reactor 1 Freedom, currently planned for 2028. International partner contributions will be folded into the lunar base plan where possible. The repurposing is genuine, but it will create winners and losers because some hardware adapts far more easily than others. NASA is choosing to skip the orbital layer entirely and plant infrastructure directly on the surface. The argument is that the surface is where the science happens, where the in situ resource utilization experiments happen, where the technology proving ground for Mars actually exists. An orbital station adds a link in the chain without adding proportional value to those goals. The counterargument is real, and we should not gloss over it. Orion does not have the propulsion to operate independently from a low lunar orbit. Gateway's specific orbital path, A near rectilinear halo orbit was partly chosen because of Orion's limitations. Removing the gateway means the surface architecture has to compensate for that gap, and the weight of that compensation falls almost entirely on one company. SpaceX is no longer supplementary to Artemis. It is load-bearing. The Starship landing system is how astronauts get from lunar orbit to the surface, and without gateway in the architecture, there is no backup to that dependency. Every crewed landing now runs through a single commercial provider. Isaacman understands this world from the inside. He funded private missions, flew on a commercial rocket, and built a business inside the same commercial space economy he now oversees as administrator. That gives him a fluency with how commercial partners actually operate, what timelines are realistic, and where the leverage points are. We have never had a NASA administrator who brought that specific experience to the role, and it shows in how differently this restructuring reads compared to anything we have seen from the agency before. The question we should be asking is a reasonable one. Does that fluency create alignment, or does it create conflicts of interest? That conversation will intensify as SpaceX's role in the program grows. So here is where we actually stand today. Artemis II is the most consequential crewed spaceflight in over 50 years, and it is happening against a backdrop of the most significant strategic reorganization NASA has seen in decades. 4 astronauts are completing a journey that represents 20 years of engineering, political negotiation, and $100 billion in investment. And the man who now runs the agency that built all of it just rewrote the next 10 years of its future a week before they left. Whether the ignition plan delivers is unknowable right now. 3-phase plans with decade-long horizons have collapsed before. International partners who built hardware in good faith are now navigating a diplomatic and contractual situation that has no clean precedent. China is not waiting. What we do know is that the choice has been made. NASA is going directly to the surface, faster, with more commercial dependence and less orbital infrastructure than any previous version of this plan envisioned. The bet is that directness beats complexity, and that the clock matters more than the elegance of the architecture. Artemis III is targeting 2027. If it launches on time, without gateway, with Starship as the only path to the surface, we will know whether this gamble was a strategy or overconfidence.